Let's now go across to Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former Indian ambassador to France, who is joining us live on the show. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, welcome to the show, sir. A lot is being said about the significance of this visit, the fact that Prime Minister Modi is only the second Indian leader after Dr. Manmohan Singh to have been given the honor of being the honor of guest, the guest of honor at the Bastille Day parade. And then, of course, a lot is being said about how defense ties are going to be taken to the next level. During this two-day visit, a lot of defense deals are on the anvil. How important do you think this visit really is for the India-France relationship?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it's a hugely important relationship. And as you rightly said, the two countries have a lot of deals. What I want to try and paint in front of you and your audience is how the defense relationship has moved from a seller-buyer relationship to an investor-investee relationship to something like co-production, which is on the anvil, especially if Safran decides to co-develop the engines with the Indians. So we are looking at two countries. I just wanted to let you know, Neha, that India has something like 30 odd strategic partnerships. But among all the strategic partnerships, the one which has the maximum strategic convergence is between India and France, because both of them believe in an independent foreign policy. Both of them believe in practicing strategic autonomy, and both of them seek a multipolar world. They are using the defense relationship as a means to achieve those large overriding goals. But I think, as one of your colonels or generals was saying a little bit before, I think it is the rapidity with which the defense relationship has changed from a buyer-seller relationship to something like co-production. I think this is what will take the relationship to the next level.
Well, it certainly looks that way because France has actually promised to support India's Atmanirbhar initiative like no other country, with more considerable transfer of technology and proposals for co-development of next-generation defense equipment. Like you said, it's not just a buyer-seller relationship anymore. The deals that are on the anvil are going to be about jointly, building submarines in India, about jointly building aircraft engines. And this is on the lines of the deals that we've seen between India and the US very recently during Prime Minister's state visit to Washington. Do you believe that the whole idea of transfer of technology is something that is now, in a sense, redefining India's relationships with countries like France and the US?
So happy you touched upon this important aspect. With due respect to the relationship we have with the United States, and I don't want to belittle it in any way, but I think it'll be unfair to France if we do not underline the fact that France's transfer of technology in the defense area goes back to the 1950s and 60s.
That's right.
When the Uragan engine was known as Tufani and when the Alouette engine was known as Chetak. So it's a completely different ball game. I would argue France has more consistently, over time, and more substantially transferred technology in the defense sector. And that is something that India must appreciate. And it's not been an on-again, off-again relationship. I'm not pointing fingers at another country, but France has been consistent, and it has really tried to stand by India. It takes into account Indian sensitivities. If we say that this equipment should not go to the hands of Pakistan, that is something France would readily understand and accept. And that is not something a lot of our strategic partners do. So on the whole, transfer of technology has happened close to 100%, I would argue, in the case of the Scorpene submarines. In the case of Safran, we are really taking it to the next level if we can design and co-develop, co-design, co-development of the engines. If that happens, I think you're right, the defense relationship would have been taken to the next level.
Well, you're quite right, sir, in pointing out that we should not be unfair to France by, in a sense, drawing this equivalence between France and the United States, because fact of the matter is the absence of transfer of technology was a huge thorn in India's side as far as the India-US relationship was concerned up until very recently, while with France, this goes back decades. And let's not also forget that France was one of the few countries that actually stood by India in the aftermath of its nuclear tests in 1998, going as far as to even oppose the sanctions that were imposed on India. So would you say, sir, then, that historically this really has been one of the most important strategic partnerships for India, as Prime Minister Modi said before his departure, a long-standing and time-tested one?
Absolutely. I would say also that that is because there is no outstanding problem between the two countries when it comes to the defense arena. There is no outstanding problem. And I was saying in one of the articles I wrote for a newspaper that Prime Minister Modi was the first non-Western leader to come to Paris and call on President Macron immediately after his election in 2017. I was packing my bags as ambassador, was trying to leave France with a little bit of tourism and so on. That was not to be. And I was told, no, the PM is coming. And I was wondering why the PM is coming. And that is just PM's style of investment in leaders. I would say without fear of contradiction that two leaders are considered the closest to Prime Minister Modi. One, Shinzo Abe, who is no more, and second, Emmanuel Macron. So from 2017 onwards, there has been a personal investment of time and energy by the two leaders. And as you know, Neha, in diplomacy, these things matter. But I think you are quite right in saying the way France has taken up our interests in the UN Security Council, for example, listing of Pak terrorists. Now, that is an issue on which France has taken the lead in the UN Security Council. France has helped us gain membership of the Missile Technology Control Regime. They have helped us get membership of the Wassenaar Group. So if you talk of a strategic partnership which enjoys trust, confidence, and efficient performance, I can think of no other strategic partnership, frankly. Like I said, I'm not belittling other strategic partnerships, but I think you have to somehow reckon with the fact that this has withstood the test of time, and it has been so consistent and so substantial, no matter who the president of France has been and who the prime minister of India has been.
It's interesting. You say this is a time-tested relationship, regardless of who the leaders at the helm of affairs might have been, but you also believe that the personal friendship and chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and President Macron has played a critical role in strengthening this relationship over the years. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. The China factor. Of course, it came up in talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. And I think it would be pretty safe to assume that this is going to be discussed between President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Modi as well, because we do know that a key strategic convergence between the two countries is the Indo-Pacific. France is an important player here, and it is, of course, well established by now that China's growing aggression, hegemony, and expansionism is a concern for India, for France, and for the international community in general. How big a factor do you think this is going to be when the two leaders meet tomorrow?
So that's an excellent question you've raised. I would respond by saying two things. On the Indo-Pacific, relationship between India and France is of paramount importance. Because if you take the Indo-Pacific theater, the United States is more invested in the Pacific, and the Quad is more active in the Pacific. The Indian Ocean is somewhat lightly managed. And I'm a little worried because from 2008 onwards, there has been semi-permanent presence of China in the Indian Ocean. Neha, I should take a minute or two of your valuable time and tell you that I was attending a conference in China when a Chinese scholar told me that it is Indian Ocean, it is not India's ocean. So that is their perspective on the Indian Ocean. France has the largest real estate in the Indian Ocean. They've got Reunion Islands, other islands. They've got Marines posted there. They've got forces posted there. They've got people living there. And please remember this. They are the only country which allows India to use their bases in the Reunion Islands, which is valuable for India. So if you think of the Indian Ocean, the relationship between France and India is the fulcrum. On your question of China, I wish to be clear-headed. I don't think India's current relationship with China mirrors the relationship between France and China. So we should not expect France to do and say the same things that we do. France is tied to China in important ways that India is not. So France, along with European Union, considers China a partner, a rival, and a competitor. So as long as we don't expect any help on the land border, say Galwan, Ladakh, there we are going to be on our own. It is our troops, our boots on the ground. But in the maritime theater, you're absolutely right. France has a profound interest, along with India, in maintaining the Indian Ocean free of any impediment, because two-thirds of their trade goes through the Indian Ocean. So Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific, there is a total convergence of interest between India and France. On the land border, they will probably give us intelligence. They will probably supply us equipment if we pay for it. We should not expect any boots on the ground other than Indian boots. As long as we are clear about this, I don't foresee any problem. But I would certainly say we should not expect a complete synchronization of relationship on China. France has a slightly different perspective, even from the European Union. For example, the European Union is seeking to de-risk the relationship from China. I think India should tell European Union that please do a free trade agreement with us. That is the best de-risking strategy for European Union vis-a-vis China.
And that certainly is something that India is very keen on. Sir, I know you have to leave, but I'd be very grateful if you could indulge me for another couple of minutes so I could ask you on some more critical issues. Now, there are some who believe that France faced a setback when Aukus came into being in 2021, with Australia scrapping its $90 billion contract with France for submarines. France felt it had been stabbed in the back. And at that time, some very angry French strategists said Paris should fully bank on India. How big a factor do you think Aukus is in the Indo-French relationship?
So AUKUS was an important factor, as you rightly say. But my assessment is that they have made up, and Australia and France have tried to put their relationship back on an even keel. It'll take some time before the relationship goes back to status quo ante. But I do want to tell you that regardless of AUKUS, France has taken a bet on India. And the bet is that in as much as a multipolar Asia, a multipolar Indo-Pacific is a sine qua non for a multipolar world. This is what the French and the Indians believe. Now, who do you think can ensure a multipolar Asia and a multipolar Indo-Pacific? The answer has to be India. Otherwise, you are looking at hegemony by China, which is something you pointed out in your earliest opening remarks. So I think France has taken a reasoned assessment that in the Indo-Pacific, in Asia, India is the only country worth its name which can act as a counter to the hegemonic ambitions of Asia, of China. That is something they believe in. But they won't say it because they believe not in confronting China, but they believe in engaging China. So there is a delicate diplomatic balancing act that France is playing vis-a-vis China. But the bottom line is a multipolar Indo-Pacific, a multipolar Asia. It is for this reason that France has taken a bet on India.
France has taken a bet on India. There is no doubt that everybody seems to have a very delicate balancing act to do with China. After calling Xi Jinping a dictator, President Biden has been sending secretary after secretary to Beijing, but that's another story altogether. So do you believe that the Ukraine war is likely to come up in these talks as well? Now, it is well known that there is a divergence of views between India and the West, including France, on the Ukraine war and Russia's role in it. But France has indicated that it respects India's position, that there is an understanding of India's position, even if it's an area of divergence. And interestingly, the French ambassador to India recently said that the French approach is not to preach or to try and put pressure on India. How do you think this is an issue that is likely to be tackled by the two countries? I mean, just yesterday, there was the NATO summit that happened in the Lithuanian capital with NATO sort of assuring Ukraine of full support. And, here we're in a situation where India hasn't even condemned Russia or Putin once for this, for its invasion of Ukraine. So how do you think this issue is likely to be handled between the two sides?
So 3 points, Neha. Point number one, I don't think the French were too thrilled with the position we took on Ukraine. It's no secret that they weren't very excited, they weren't too thrilled. Second, I believe that they have understood our position on Ukraine now. No question. I think that speaks to the trust that has been developed between Prime Minister Modi and President Macron, that in a series of conversations, Prime Minister Modi has made Mr. Macron understand where India is coming from on this issue. Last point, Ukraine will absolutely figure in the discussions, I have no doubt. If for no other reason than the Indian Prime Minister wanting an objective, personal assessment of what is going on in Ukraine. There has been an information war when it comes to Ukraine. There are Western sources which are saying something. If you read the Russian sources, they say something else. Frankly, there is really the fog of war. Nobody knows what the hell is going on there. I think in a private, confidential assessment, there is nobody better than President Macron who can give an assessment, an objective assessment of what is happening in Ukraine. This is important for Prime Minister Modi for two reasons. One, the impending G20 summit in Delhi. Second, we have been arguing for diplomacy and dialogue. The short code for diplomacy dialogue is that India wants the war in Ukraine to end because the war has not got any beneficial consequences for India. Consider food, fuel, fertilizer, we have a problem. So it is good to get a first-hand assessment from President Macron as to who's winning, who's losing, what are the chances of a diplomatic solution, and what are the prospects of a G20 summit that can have a separate paragraph on this question. So I don't think the Ukraine issue has had any negative impact on the bilateral relationship, but I do believe it will figure prominently in what I consider as international regional issues. There is always a segment, international regional issues, when the two leaders meet. This is the area in which Ukraine, I believe, will figure prominently. And I think the Indian Prime Minister will appreciate the assessment, will benefit from the assessment of President Macron. France is a great European power. It's in the heart of Europe. This conflict is in the heart of Europe. So it is good to have an assessment from the French president as to where things are heading in Ukraine.
Fascinating. Final questions, I promise, before I let you go. Apart from the fact that France and other Western countries see Russia and Putin as aggressors, as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, there is also a concerted effort on part of the United States, for example, to wean India off its huge dependence on Russia for arms supplies, which is why for the first time you've seen US agreeing to transfer technology to India. As far as France is concerned, do you believe, again, weaning India away from Russia is an important factor? Because in recent years, France has already emerged as the second largest weapons supplier to India after Russia.
So if I can be perfectly honest with you, I don't care whether it is in America's interest or France's interest, but I think it's in India's interest that we don't put all our eggs in the Russian basket. I hope
Yes.
I'm being sufficiently clear when I say that. And to me, the two other countries which will be long term defense collaborators with India, one is France, and I would put France ahead of the United States for the simple reason that it has been a more long standing partner of India than United States, which has only recently come into the game. Secondly, I do believe the practice of strategic autonomy by India is well understood by United States and France. In fact, I would argue the Prime Minister's visit to France, close on the heels of the hugely successful visit he undertook to the United States, is itself an expression of strategic autonomy. We want to be on good terms with both US and France. So I believe India will not make the same mistake it did in the past, which is put all defense eggs in one basket. I think the United States, France, and other countries will do their bit to make sure that India is not dependent on Russia. And I think India must convey to France that we want to deal with the European Union because we want you to de-risk with China. There's a lot of mutual interest at stake here. And with the United States as well, we can say we want to be in on the semiconductors, on 6G, on technology, so that we make sure that there is a resilient supply chain when it comes to technology and critical earth minerals. We have now a Trade and Technology Council with EU, and France is going to be an important partner for India in that Trade and Technology Council. So I see a whole lot of issues which I think will make for greater convergence. And I don't think United States and France will have any problem with having a defense relationship which is substantive and mutually beneficial.
Absolutely. And you're quite right in pointing out that it is in India's own interest not to put all its eggs in one basket. And let's not forget that given that Russia is now increasingly seen as a close ally of China, that is perhaps another very big reason why India needs to reduce its dependence on Moscow.